Major depression is one of the biggest mental health challenges we face, and for so many people, the standard treatments just don't cut it. So, scientists are on the hunt for new answers, and one of the most incredible avenues they're exploring is this intersection between psychedelics, our immune system, and our state of mind. So, let's dive into this really fascinating paper that asks a pretty profound question. Could the Amazonian brew ayahuasca actually help by cooling the body's own information?
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to dig into the surprising link between inflammation and depression. Then, we'll go right inside the experiment itself, see where everyone started, and look at the critical results just 48 hours later. And finally, we'll connect the dots between the body and the mind to see if this points to a whole new way of treating depression. So, first things first, let's establish the why. Why even look here? Well, major depressive disorder is really common, and a lot of patients are in this tough spot called treatment-resistant depression. That just means they haven't gotten better after trying at least 2 different standard antidepressants. And that fact alone tells us we've got to start looking beyond the usual places to figure out what's really going on. And that brings us to the big question the researchers wanted to answer. They already had clues that ayahuasca could have some really fast antidepressant effects. But the question was, how? Their big idea, their hypothesis, was focused on the immune system. They asked, could this ancient brew actually be cooling down the physical inflammation that might be fueling all of that mental distress?
Okay, so here's the core idea. I want you to think of inflammation as your body's alarm system, right? It's absolutely essential for fighting off germs and healing when you get hurt. But for some people with depression, especially the ones who are treatment resistant, it's like that alarm system is stuck in the on position. It just keeps ringing quietly in the background, leading to the state of chronic low-grade inflammation.
So how do you actually track this inflammation? Well, scientists need a clear signal. And the main one they used in the study is called C-reactive protein, or CRP for short. Your liver makes it, and when there's a lot of it in your blood, it's a super reliable sign that the body's inflammatory alarm is going off. For our purposes, just think of CRP as the main alarm signal we're going to be watching.
And what tells that alarm signal to fire in the first place? Well, one of the key messengers is something called Interleukin 6, or IL-6. It's another one of these inflammatory biomarkers. And one of its biggest jobs is to send a message to the liver saying, hey, start pumping out that CRP. So you've got IL-6 as the messenger and CRP as the alarm. The study kept an eye on both.
All right, so they've got their idea, they've got their biomarkers. How do you actually put it to the test? Let's take a look at the experiment they designed to try and get some real answers.
This was the real deal, what we call the gold standard for this type of research. It was a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. And that's just a fancy way of saying that neither the people in the study nor the researchers knew who was getting the actual ayahuasca and who was getting a really convincing placebo. They had 28 patients with treatment-resistant depression and 45 healthy controls for comparison. Everyone got just one single dose, and the really important stuff, their depression scores and those inflammation markers in their blood, were measured right before and then again 48 hours later. Now, before we get to their really exciting results, we have to understand where everybody started from. What was the starting line? So let's look at the baseline data to see what the differences were before anyone took anything.
Okay, now this is so interesting because it just perfectly confirms the whole reason for the study. Take a look at the graph on the left. That's panel A. The bar labeled PG, that's the patient group. And CG is the control group. I mean, you can just see it with your eyes. The bar for the patients is way higher, meaning they started out with significantly higher levels of CRP, our main inflammation marker, than the healthy controls did. For them, that alarm was already ringing louder from the get-go.
And the starting data had another little twist. This chart, panel A, is showing us data just from the patient group. Now, you would normally expect that cortisol, the body's main stress hormone, would go up when inflammation goes up. But here, they found the exact opposite. For these patients, higher inflammation was actually connected to lower cortisol levels. And that hints that their entire stress response system is just out of whack, which could be a key biological fingerprint of their condition. Okay, so we've set the stage. The patient group has higher inflammation and a haywire stress system. Now for the main event. What happened in those critical 48 hours after that single dose? And boom, this chart tells the headline story beautifully. Let's look at panel A again. The red plots, that's everyone who got ayahuasca.
The blue plots, that's the placebo group. Just follow the red bars. From D0, that's day 0, to D2, 2 days later, you see this clear, significant drop in those CRP levels. Now look at the blue bars for the placebo group. Nothing. In fact, their levels kind of drift up a little. This is just a stunning visual difference between the two treatments. And if we put some hard numbers to that graph, the difference becomes even more dramatic. Check this out. In the ayahuasca group, CRP levels just plummeted, down about 27% in patients. But look at the placebo group. The patient's inflammation levels there actually went up by 20%. So you have this huge split. One group's inflammation drops significantly, and the other's actually gets worse. Now, interestingly, good science also tells us what didn't happen. The researchers found no similar change in IL-6, that other biomarker we talked about. This suggests the effect was really specific to that CRP pathway, which adds a really important layer of detail to the whole story.
So a drop in a blood marker is fascinating for sure, but does it actually mean anything for how the patients were feeling? This next part is where we get to the real aha moment of the whole study, linking that biological change directly to the psychological one. This chart right here, this is the heart of the paper. Each one of those red dots is a patient who took ayahuasca. The vertical axis shows how much their CRP dropped, so the lower the dot, the bigger the drop in inflammation. And the horizontal axis shows their depression score 48 hours later, so the further to the left the dot is, the better they felt. And you can see this beautiful, clear trend. The patients who had the biggest drop in inflammation were also the ones who felt the most relief from their depression. This right here, this is the bridge connecting body and mind.
And the researchers themselves knew how important this was. They said it right here. These findings help us understand the biological mechanisms behind what's happening. It's not just a mystery anymore. It's not just that ayahuasca can have these effects. This study gives us a real potential reason how it might be working by directly targeting the body's inflammatory response.
So, with this really powerful evidence in our hands, let's just zoom out for a second. What does this all mean for the bigger picture? Could this be pointing us down a completely new path for treatment?
So let's just wrap it all up. What did we learn? Well, first, we saw that treatment-resistant depression can be tied to this state of chronic inflammation. Then, we saw this incredible evidence that just a single dose of ayahuasca can rapidly bring that inflammation down. And, most importantly, that physical change was directly connected to people feeling better mentally. This really opens up a new way of thinking about how these powerful substances might actually work.
Of course, good science is always honest about its limits, and the authors point out a couple of things here. The number of patients was relatively small, and they only measured these markers once after the session. Science is a process, right? These results are a huge piece of the puzzle, and they really paved the way for bigger, more detailed studies to come.
And that leaves us with a really big provocative question to think about. This study used a psychedelic, but the core thing it's highlighting is an anti-inflammatory effect. So, if a key feature of some types of depression is actually physical inflammation, could targeting that inflammation directly, whether it's with psychedelics or other kinds of therapies, be a huge part of the future of mental health care? It's a pretty powerful idea.